All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at the 1995 classic Se7en. This is such a fascinating case study because we're talking about a relentlessly grim, pitch-black script that completely defied 1990s Hollywood conventions to become an absolute cinematic masterpiece. The studio was literally terrified of this movie, yet it went on to become a massive cultural touchstone. So we're going to unpack exactly how that happened.
You know, what's really wild is how the film uses this famously optimistic Hemingway quote at the very end. It completely subverts the dark, inescapable reality we've just sat through for 2 hours. Detective Somerset says he agrees with the second part, that the world is worth fighting for. But man, the underlying message still leaves you feeling deeply unsettled. But to understand how we actually get to that complex ending, we really need to go back to the beginning.
Here's our roadmap for today. Number 1. A script born of darkness. 2. The battle for the box. 3. Designing a world of decay. 4. Sins, apathy, and meaning. And 5. A grim cultural legacy. Let's jump right in.
Okay, Section 1, a script born of darkness, focusing on Walker's inerrancy and Fincher's reluctance. The origin of all this evil actually begins with aspiring writer Andrew Kevin Walker. Back in 1986, he moved from the quiet suburbs of Pennsylvania straight into a crime-ridden late 80s New York City. He experienced this massive culture shock, just witnessing rising crime and drug abuse firsthand. And that incredibly depressing experience? That directly inspired the unnamed, gloomy, rain-soaked city we see in the film. Walker basically poured all his own feelings of being surrounded by open sin right into the spec script.
Now, just listen to this quote. It brilliantly illustrates director David Fincher's absolute refusal to direct another film at the time. He had just come off his debut, Alien 3, which was just a miserable experience for him, filled with constant studio interference. He famously, and quite darkly, said he'd rather die of colon cancer than make another movie. But then his agent sent him Walker's script. And here's the crazy part. He was accidentally sent Walker's bleak original draft instead of the watered-down studio rewrite. Fincher was instantly captivated by its totally uncompromising exploration of evil and realized, okay, I absolutely have to make this.
So the whole thing really pivots on how perfectly the script contrasts its two lead detectives. On one side, you've got William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman. He's this weary veteran, deeply pessimistic, super analytical, and honestly, he's basically surrendered to the city's apathy. The guy is a week away from retirement. Then on the flip side, you have David Mills, played by Brad Pitt. He's the rookie, optimistic, incredibly impulsive, and he naively believes he can be the hero who just sweeps in and fixes everything. It's your classic buddy cop pairing, sure, but Walker uses it to dig into some heavy moral questions.
And just look at the ticking clock built entirely around our killer, John Doe. He operates on this methodical, inescapable 7-day schedule of murders based on the 7 deadly sins. Starting Monday with gluttony, tearing through greed, sloth, lust, and pride before exploding on Sunday with envy and wrath. It maps out a trap, not just for the detectives, but for us, the audience. We are dragged right along with them.
Which brings us to Section 2, the battle for the box. It's a classic showdown of art versus commerce. What went down behind the scenes was an intense, drag-out clash between visionary filmmakers trying to protect their art and a studio that was absolutely terrified of alienating a mainstream audience.
The entire conflict boiled down to the film's climax. Studio executives at New Line Cinema were completely opposed to the script's bleak ending. If you've seen the film, you already know it ends with that horrifying reveal of what's inside a delivery box out in the middle of a remote desert. Well, the executives desperately wanted to change that to something way more mainstream, optimistic, and, typical for a 90s thriller.
Get a load of these alternate endings the studio actually pitched to lighten the tone. They genuinely suggested putting the head of one of Mills's dogs in the box instead of his wife, Tracy's. No way, right? They pitched having Mills shoot Somerset to stop him from killing Doe. They even had a draft featuring a heroic rescue of a surviving Tracy, culminating in, get this, a last-minute shootout in a burning church. The studio just flat-out refused to accept that these protagonists shouldn't get a standard heroic action sequence. But David Fincher and his stars fought back hard. Brad Pitt actually laid down a strict ultimatum. He said he would walk away from the movie entirely if the studio changed that ending. He was still stinging from his previous film, Legends of the Fall, which had its original ending cut after test audiences complained, and he wasn't about to let it happen again. Pitt insisted that his character, Mills, had to shoot the killer out of pure passion, not some sense of morality. And this unified front,
It ultimately forced the studio to preserve Fincher and Walker's dark vision.
With the ending locked in, let's move to Section 3, Designing a World of Decay and its groundbreaking aesthetic. The crew set out to build a world of complete, inescapable corruption. Fincher wanted us to feel just as trapped as the characters. To pull that off, he literally had sets built with unremovable walls, so the camera crew was physically confined within these tight spaces. He also utilized constant, unrelenting rain to make the city feel incredibly oppressive, completely masking the fact that it was actually filmed in sunny Los Angeles.
Now, to capture this intense decay on camera, cinematographer Darius Kanji used a really expensive chemical process called a bleach bypass. Essentially, this technique leaves silver in the film stock, which creates these gritty, unbelievably deep blacks paired with luminous light tones. The studio actually complained that the daily footage was literally too dark to see, but Kanji and Fincher refused to compromise, and they eventually cut a highly praised promotional reel out of that dark footage that finally got the executives to back off.
And that haunting aesthetic extended right into the revolutionary title sequence designed by Kyle Cooper. Fincher told Cooper straight up, "I want the audience to want to run screaming from the theater during the credits." So Cooper documented John Doe's terrifying preparations. We literally see the killer shaving his fingertips, developing photos in a grimy bathtub, and crossing out words like pregnancy and marriage in his chaotic, etched journals. It perfectly sets this dreadful tone before the killer even steps onto the screen.
Okay, moving past the incredible aesthetics, we hit Section 4, Sins, Apathy, and Meaning. Welcome to the thematic inferno. Because the core concept tying this whole movie together isn't actually murder, it's societal apathy. The film is constantly asking us, what happens when an entire city simply stops caring about the suffering happening right next door?
John Doe treats his gruesome crime scenes like twisted art installations. The journalist Kim Newman pointed out that this perfectly aligns with the philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of spectacular punishment. That's the idea of violence enacted as a massive, public, theatrical display. Doe is using these horrifying setups to force an utterly apathetic society to finally wake up and pay attention to their everyday sins. He wants to make it literally impossible to look away. It's a terrifying thought experiment. What would it actually take to make you care about a total stranger's suffering?
It's actually kind of crazy when you put the veteran detective and the killer side by side. Both Somerset and John Doe share a surprisingly similar realization. They both clearly see that the city is deeply infected with decay. But their reactions? Complete opposites. Somerset responds with resignation. He retreats into apathy and just plans to move far away. Doe, on the other hand, violently appoints himself as the Punisher, launching a one-man crusade to force a reckoning.
And notice how the movie constantly forces us to look at this stark contrast between high art and gruesome murder. Doe's religious fanaticism is anchored in classic literature. Somerset literally has to research Dante's Divine Comedy, Chaucer's The Parson's Tale, and Milton's Paradise Lost just to wrap his head around the killer's motives. We even hear beautiful classical music, like Bach, playing in the library amidst all this darkness. It highlights this massive cultural divide, using the absolute height of human artistic achievement as a literal roadmap for absolute brutality. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, a grim cultural legacy, and how this became the sleeper hit of the decade. Leading up to its release, the studio was sweating bullets. They firmly believed a film this violent, this bleak, and this mature would completely alienate mainstream viewers. The marketing team was scrambling, trying to figure out how on earth to sell a film that actively punishes its audience. But wow, did the release prove everyone wrong. The film grossed a staggering $327.3 million worldwide. It became a totally unexpected sleeper hit, ultimately landing as the 7th highest-grossing film of the year. Audiences were completely captivated by the mystery, the incredible performances by Pitt, Freeman, and Kevin Spacey, and honestly, the sheer audacity of a film that absolutely refused to pull its punches.
The ripple effect here is just massive. Its legacy is undeniable. It completely revitalized David Fincher's directing career after that Alien 3 disaster. It proved Brad Pitt was way more than just a romantic lead, shifting him permanently into serious, heavy, dramatic roles. Kyle Cooper's opening credits sparked an absolute renaissance in horror title design. And the film's gritty, rain-soaked, morally complex aesthetic, that directly inspired later massive hits like the Saw franchise and 2022's The Batman. It permanently cemented the phrase, "what's in the box," into global pop culture forever. Which really just shows why paying attention to these bold creative leaps matters. They redefine the media we consume for decades.
Which brings us right back to Somerset's final words. At the end of the film, Somerset tells his captain he'll be around, basically deciding not to retire after all. And it leaves us with this heavy, lingering question. Did John Doe's twisted, horrific victory actually manage to shake Somerset out of his apathy? Did a serial killer inadvertently inspire the exact hope necessary for a good man to stay and try to save a decaying world? It's a dark, super complex thought to chew on, and exactly why this explainer proves Se7en is a masterpiece that stays with you long, long after the screen goes black.